Now, many a film or TV show has been centred around one of England's really spectacular country houses. Their grandeur and majestic designs make for one of the most unique possessions that Britain really has. And the theme for tonight's lecture at the Australian Decorative and Fine Arts Society is the power and glory of English country houses. It's happening at 6:30 at the Wesley Church Hall. To tell us a bit more, professional artist and lecturer Anthony Russell is here. Good morning.
Hello, morning.
Welcome to Dubbo.
Nice to be here.
Thanks for coming in. This is, it's a fairly open-ended topic, isn't it? The power and glory of English houses. And when you think of a mansion, as a young kid, you think of a mansion. A lot of people's visions would go towards a stately English manor house of some kind, wouldn't they?
Yes. Now, it's interesting you say stately and manor house because, of course, most of what I'm doing is going to be stately. It's going to be the really big ones.
Massive.
Yes. Because I think they're the most exciting, and also they tell you most about the development of English history and the culture. So that's what interests me most, really, because when you look at their slow development, you see how they change, and that reflects a society changing, moving slowly towards democracy and civilization. If they're both the same thing, it's those sort of
If
themes.
they're both, yeah,
yes.
Okay. So when you talk about a grand English country house, what do you think of? Or what are you describing?
In England, it's unique. We have this incredible collection of magnificent buildings, many of them looking like Renaissance palaces. Most of them, the biggest, have their original owners or, descendants
Families of,
still
yeah.
in them, which is incredible. And most of them still have incredible art collections inside, reflecting that family's wealth and prestige and hubris, quite honestly. And so that makes it a unique... No, not even France, which is a sort of, another major cultural country, can match contents and owners still in them.
And why is that? Is it just because it was deemed as being really important to keep it in the family and that sort of thing?
It's a good question. I think because, though we had a civil war, actually it toppled nothing. So really, since William the Conqueror arrived, that's 1,000 years, we haven't seen any movement. And, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Boring, isn't it?
A bit boring, exactly. Exactly. So the same people are in power. So, it makes for a very particular kind of culture. And we don't believe in, dramatic acts of violence.
So what started your fascination with these types of... I guess they're homes, but they're more than homes, aren't they?
Interesting. I think I grew up in just a little manor house, but it had great, sort of pretensions. It had a drive, it had a mausoleum and a gatehouse, and a nice little park. And I suppose I always imagined myself in something, bigger, more stately. And I think everyone in Britain probably does, if they're honest. Mm-hmm. They see themselves, it's the Englishman's house is his castle sort of thing. But my point, I think, which is important, is that in a way these houses reflect an entire society, because we're all affected by that culture, because it sort of sits down on top of us, and it could oppress an entire people. If you're not careful, I think you need to be aware. Are we benefiting from our history or actually being sat on by it?
And why do you think? Why do you question that? Because there is so much importance placed on history and the importance of it. Families have made sure they kept properties for generation after generation. How can that be a bad thing?
Interesting. Well, Prince Charles is always saying that it is really important that we look to history, because history tells us what's happened before and we can find out what's going to happen in the future. And I totally agree with him. He's absolutely right. It's important that we preserve that. But there's more to it, because if you come here, for instance, I notice that people are incredibly engaging on the street, not just intelligent people, but anybody, on public transport, anybody you meet. And it impresses me a lot. And people are not so interactive in Britain. They're really not. And you just get a sense that something is holding them down. They're under a system. And I think that's really telling. And when I come here, it's marked.
That's interesting, isn't it? So is it expectations of what has been seen through history that's keeping them maybe just held back a bit and not as open, or a fear of something going wrong under their...
It's a mixture of things, but I think if you've got such incredible titles, wonderful robes that people wear, stately homes, I think it probably does inhibit the rest of us. We all feel slightly sort of, we got to keep the lid on it.
Keeping up appearances in a way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's the Downton Abbey syndrome, I suppose.
Yeah.
Though I hate to mention it.
We're talking this morning to Anthony Russell, who's in Dubbo tonight. The Power and Glory of English Country Houses is the theme of his lecture. And an interesting fact about you is that you actually, for a number of years, went around to not just these sort of large homes, but also to cathedrals and other sort of stately buildings to advise on furnishing them. Tell us about that time.
Well, they all actually have a similar theme, and that is because the island is small, because we've got a big population, because we have to keep up, universities have to keep up with Ivy League, universities, for instance. There's an 8-week term, isn't there, for universities? So they need to reconfigure their spaces to make them really work. So through the holidays, they have a corporate identity, helps raise money. But also in cathedrals, it's a way of getting more people into them. So they're not just, once a week for a cold service on a Sunday. It's the idea that the whole building can come alive. And it's the most important building in any area, isn't it, in the centre of the community. So why not just fill it through the week as well? For almost anything, as long as it's vaguely caring and spiritual, why not fill the buildings?
Yeah.
And so I work with Luke Hughes, who is this high-profile consultant. And he always said that a good architecture is grossly undermined by bad furniture, and that it's the furniture that makes sense of buildings. And so I think that's what we were about. We were about making buildings work properly. So and that's an ongoing process.
Yeah. Did you literally turn up to St Paul's Cathedral, turn in there and say, no, this is not working. We need a couch there. We need a TV there. Obviously on a slightly different scale. But is that what you were doing? You were looking at how you can get more people in there and what they can do while they're in there?
Absolutely. And, it's funny you say that because at times I'd turn up at a rural church and they gave me a microphone and I felt like Gordon Gekko saying, greed is good. You must wipe out all your furniture. And there's always a group at the back who are muttering. Oh,
horrified.
Get him out of here. But we're not saying that. We never did. Some churches have fine furniture and they need to keep them.
Yeah.
Other churches have bad quality pine furniture. Why not get rid of it?
Why have it?
Reconfigure. Yeah. And it's the same in the country houses. In a way, they need to reconfigure as well and make use of their space, become a community asset.
Yeah, and so when you're making, I mean, are the owners or the church group, are they, do they end up doing what you're advising, or do they sometimes not?
Well, you see, this is the thing. Again, there's a huge variety of owners, and of course it's by your primogenitor. With this wonderful system we have in Britain, the oldest son inherits all. That's quite controversial. But the oldest son may not necessarily be an entrepreneur. He might be a useless spendthrift. So these stately homes are sort of dependent on the generations, and some of them have a good idea what to do. Others just have no idea and just spend money like water. So it's a worry.
Yeah, and one of the things I mentioned at the start is that these homes are thought of as just a great asset for the country. So if things go wrong, that sort of asset dwindles away, and that ties back to, I guess your original thought is how important are they or aren't they, that sort of thing. But they are an asset, aren't they?
They are a huge asset. And, I have one particular lecture that majors on Blenheim Palace. I'm giving that tomorrow.
Okay.
And I do mention it in the one this evening. And Blenheim Palace is an interesting example because it's given to one family for a great military victory, John Churchill. And yet every succeeding generation has struggled to live in the house, to keep it up, but also each son of the Duke, it's the Duke of Marlborough, has struggled just to keep their own together, whether it's, spending money like water, as I say, or a drug abuse like poor, Jamie, the present Marquis of Blandford, that's the title for the son of the Duke, who's barely managed to hold it together and has been in prison. They've all suffered, and it's as if the pressure of the culture is too much for them. And that's not just, of course, the Dukes in Blenheim, but it's all of us, maybe.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? You'll be looking at those and plenty more at tonight's lecture. And you're also an artist yourself. We had a quick chat before we came on air, but your sort of portrait and landscape are your passions.
Yes. They are, and it's interesting because driving here or taking the train, or there seem to be a lot of bus replacements at the moment, but your country is stunning, and I'm not, flattering you. It really is, and it reminds me of the finest 18th century landscapes. The informal Capability Brown, as they were known. Beautiful clumps of trees, lakes, and you have that everywhere. It's grand, and for us, it's very civilized. We like it a lot. So, as somebody who loves landscape, I really like it.
So some inspiration there maybe for you.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Great. Look, nice to meet you. Good luck at the lecture tonight, 6:30 at the Wesley Church Hall. Anthony Russell, and talking about the power and glory of English country houses. Have fun.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Anthony.